There is a kind of person the world is always in a hurry to write off. The one who does not rush, who does not strain, who seems to be doing far less than everyone around them. We call them lazy. We shake our heads. And sometimes we are completely, painfully wrong about who they truly are. Because there is a vast difference between a body that is resting and a mind that is awake. And most of us are not patient enough to see the difference. There is an ancient debate that has echoed through every culture and every age. Wisdom versus strength. Who wins? Wisdom or strength? Today's story answers that question in a way you will never forget. Because as the old saying reminds us, smart thinking wins where strength fails. We have been taught that hard work is the only road to success. And there is truth in that. Genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration, the wise have always said. But there is another truth we are far slower to learn. Work smarter, not harder. Because effort without thought can wear you out long before it ever takes you anywhere. Today's story is about a boy whom an entire village had given up on. A boy who was mocked, pitied, and pointed at, until one day, life placed him in front of a king. While the strongest men of the kingdom ran, sweated, and shouted their way through 5 impossible tasks, he simply paused, watched, and saw what no one else could see. And in that quiet seeing, he changed his family's fortune forever. Before we begin, ask yourself something honestly. When was the last time you tried to push your way through a problem with pure effort, when a single moment of careful thinking would have shown you a far simpler path? So stay with this story till the very end, because by the end, you may begin to look at the so-called lazy people in your life, and perhaps even at yourself, with very different eyes. Long, long ago, in a small village at the edge of a great kingdom, there lived a young boy with his mother and father. The boy was known to everyone in the village for one thing. He was the laziest soul anyone had ever seen. While the other children of the village ran, climbed, wrestled, and worked from sunrise to sunset, this boy did as little as a boy could possibly do. His only daily task was a simple one: to keep the birds from eating his father's rice crop. But even this small duty, he refused to do the way other boys did. The other boys ran through the fields with sticks and shouted at the sky. Some carried slingshots, some clapped wooden clappers until their arms ached. But this boy had built something different. Across his father's field, he had planted tall wooden poles. Between the poles, he had tied long ropes. To the ropes, he had hung pieces of bright cloth, hollow gourds, and small bells. At one corner of the field, he had built a small shaded roof of leaves. And there, beneath the shade, he would lie on his back all day, holding a single rope in his hand. Now and then, with the smallest tug, the bells would jingle, the cloth would flutter, the gourds would knock against each other, and every bird in the sky would scatter in fright. The villagers shook their heads whenever they passed. "Look at him," they would say, "lying down while honest men work. That boy will never amount to anything." But what no one in the village ever noticed was this: while he lay beneath his shade, the boy was always watching. He watched the birds. He learned which ones came at sunrise and which came at noon. He learned how birds moved in groups, how they called to one another, how they landed, how they flew away, and which sounds made them calm or afraid. He could close his eyes and tell you, from a single chirp, which bird was flying overhead. He had memorized the music of every bird in the field. But the village saw only a lazy boy lying down. His father quietly worried. "He scares the birds, yes," he would say to his wife at night. "But if I ever fall ill, who will care for the field? Who will feed us?" That worry came through one cruel summer. The rains failed, the earth cracked, and one morning, the boy's father did not rise from his bed. A heavy fever had taken hold of him. The full weight of the field fell upon his son's untrained shoulders, and within a few weeks, the crops began to die. The boy carried water from the well, but the son drank it before the roots could. He tilled the dry soil, but his hands were soft and slow. He had never pushed himself before, and now, when it mattered most, he did not know how. One night, he sat alone beneath the stars and wept bitter tears, ashamed that he had let his family's hopes wither away with the rice. The very next morning, a royal soldier rode into the village on a great brown horse. He blew a long horn and called the villagers around him. The old king of the land, he announced, had grown weary, and his most trusted advisors had passed on. To find the cleverest young man in the kingdom, the king would hold a grand competition on the open ground beside his palace. The competition would last 5 days, 1 round each day, and the winner would be appointed the king's personal advisor for life. He would live within the palace walls, and his family would never again know hunger. The boy stepped forward before he could think. "I will go," he said. The whole village burst into laughter. "You," they cried, "the boy who lies down all day? You will stand before the king?" His mother looked at him with sad, tired eyes. His father, lying inside on his sickbed, smiled faintly and whispered, "Go, my son. Perhaps the path will teach you something." And so the boy tied his small bundle and began the 3-day walk to the palace. When he reached the great open ground beside the palace, he could scarcely believe his eyes. Hundreds of young men had gathered, tall warriors with broad shoulders, swift runners with strong legs, sharp-eyed scholars, and clever merchants. The boy, thin and quiet and dusty from the road, felt smaller than he had ever felt in his life. On the first day, the contestants were led to a wide lake at one edge of the open ground. The rule was simple: cross to the far shore, and only the first 50 would advance. The horn sounded, and hundreds of young men threw themselves into the water. The lake churned like a stormy sea. The boy did not jump in. He looked at the lake. He looked at the trees nearby. Then he walked calmly into the woods, gathered broken branches and fallen logs, lashed them together with vines, and shaped a small flat raft with a wooden paddle. The rule had said, cross the lake, not swim it. He pushed his raft into the water and paddled steadily, while around him men gasped and floundered. He stepped onto the far shore, well within the first 50. On the second day, the surviving 50 were led back to the open ground, where 50 massive wooden blocks lay in a long row. Each block had to be moved a full kilometer to a distant finish line, and only the first 25 would advance. Beside the blocks, the royal servants had laid out an assortment of tools: ropes, planks, levers, oxen yokes, axes, sharp chisels, and a wooden mallet. The strong men chose ropes and planks and began heaving and dragging their blocks inch by painful inch. The boy walked past the ropes, past the levers, and gathered the axe, the chisels, and the wooden mallet into his arms. He sat beside his block and went to work. With the axe, he chopped away the rough corners. With the chisels and the mallet, he patiently shaped what remained into a long, smooth, cylindrical roller, like the heavy stone rollers farmers used in the fields back home. Wood chips piled at his feet like fallen leaves. When his roller was finished, he stood, gave it a gentle push, and the round-bodied log began to turn smoothly along the dusty road. He walked calmly behind it, overtaking one straining contestant after another, and crossed the finish line easily within the first 25. On the third day, the remaining contestants were led to the royal garden beside the open ground, where 25 great stone tanks stood waiting. Each tank had to be filled with water from a distant well, using only a heavy clay pot, and the first 10 to finish would advance. The strong men ran back and forth, sweating heavily and spilling water with every stride. The boy walked to the far fence, where a stack of long bamboo poles lay drying in the sun. He sat down and split each pole lengthwise with a small blade, opening them into long, smooth, hollow troughs. He laid them end to end, building a narrow channel from the base of the well all the way to the edge of his tank. Where the bamboo met, he packed soft wet clay from the garden bed to seal the joints. He tilted the channel carefully, high at the well, low at the tank, and poured water into the high end. And the water flowed by itself, smoothly and steadily, all the way into his tank. While the others ran themselves into exhaustion, he stood quietly tending his bamboo canal, and his tank reached the brim long before most of the others. On the fourth day, the 10 remaining contestants were brought back to the open ground, where a tall stone tower had been built at the very center of the palace grounds. At its top, a small golden bell hung from a wooden beam. Thick ropes dangled from the top to the bottom of the tower, and the rule was to ring the bell. The first 5 to do so would advance. Strong climbers leapt at the ropes and began hauling themselves upward, while acrobats scaled the cracks between the stones. The boy walked instead to the pile of tools and chose a tall wooden bow and a single feathered arrow. He left the tower entirely, climbed onto the flat roof of a nearby stone building, and from that higher vantage point, aimed carefully across the open space. With one long breath, one slow draw, and one clean release, his arrow soared in a perfect arc and struck the bell squarely at its center. The deep ringing sound echoed across the palace walls. He had rung the bell first, without climbing a single step. On the 5th and final day, the last 5 contestants were led into the king's own private garden, where the king himself watched from a canopied seat. A royal keeper opened a small wooden cage, and out flew a beautiful crimson bird with golden tail feathers, the king's most prized garden bird, known across the kingdom for its dazzling speed. The rule was to catch the bird gently, without harming a single feather. the 4 other contestants seized nets, slings, and long poles and ran shouting through the garden after the darting bird. The harder they chased, the higher and more frantic it flew. The boy did not pick up a net or a sling. He scooped a fistful of grain into his palm and took an empty clay bowl. He walked to the pond at the center of the garden, knelt at its edge, and gently filled the bowl with cool, clear water. Then, holding the grain in one hand and the water bowl steady in the other, he stepped softly into the trees. And then he began to chirp. It was a soft, melodic call, the exact song of the little crimson bird, learned long ago in his father's rice field. While the village had been calling him lazy, the boy had been listening. He had memorized this very song and 100 others beneath the shade of his small leafy roof. He had never had a reason to use it. He was using it now. High in the leaves, the crimson bird stopped fleeing. It tilted its head. It heard one of its own, calling gently somewhere nearby, with no urgency, no fear. It flitted from branch to branch, drawn closer with every soft note, and then dropped, light as a falling petal, onto the boy's outstretched hand. It pecked happily at the grain. It dipped its small beak into the cool water and drank. It folded its wings and settled there, content. The boy closed his fingers around it as gently as a closing leaf and walked calmly back to the king, while the others were still crashing through the bushes far behind. What followed astonished even the oldest ministers of the court. The king rose slowly from his seat and walked with the boy out of the private garden and onto the great open ground where the entire kingdom had gathered to watch the final results. Standing before the enormous crowd, the king spoke aloud. The boy had not crossed the lake. He had floated across it. He had not pushed the block. He had changed its shape. He had not carried the water. He had let the water carry itself. He had not climbed the tower. He had aimed across it. And he had not chased the bird. He had made the bird come to him. Strength can be hired, the king said, his voice carrying across the open ground. Speed can be trained. Wealth can be inherited. But the eye that sees the simpler path, that is the rarest thing in the world. Then, to the gasping astonishment of the crowd, the king turned and signaled his soldiers. 2 figures were led forward from the gathered villagers, the boy's mother and father, brought quietly to the palace by royal escort that very morning. Trembling and tearful, the simple farming couple were guided onto the high stone stage beside the king himself. The king embraced them warmly before the eyes of the kingdom and turned once more to the crowd. "I came looking for an advisor," he said, "but I have found far more than that. A mind such as this is not meant only to stand beside a throne. It is meant to sit upon one." And there, in front of the thousands gathered on the open ground, the king announced that the boy would not only serve as his personal advisor, he would be wed to the king's only daughter, the princess of the realm, and named the rightful successor to the throne itself. The royal trumpet sounded long and loud. The crowd erupted in cheers and disbelief. And the boy's parents, who only weeks before had wept beside a dying field, now stood weeping again, this time in joy, beside the king of the entire kingdom. In the days that followed, The king sent his own physicians to cure the boy's father, and his own farmers to restore the dying field. The villagers who had once laughed came one by one to the father's house with bowed heads. His father only smiled and told them gently that his son had never been lazy. He had been watching, listening, and waiting for the day his eyes would be needed. And from that day forward, in the great palace, the future king sat quietly beside the throne, a young man with calm eyes, who, when asked a difficult question, would always pause first and look long at the problem before offering the path that no one else had seen. This story carries a truth that almost everyone misses. We live in a world that has fallen in love with motion. We admire people who look busy. We respect those who push themselves to the edge of exhaustion. And we are quick to call anyone who pauses, observes, or moves differently lazy. But stop for a moment and ask yourself, is every person who is moving fast actually going somewhere? And is every person who is sitting still really doing nothing? The boy in this story did something most of us forget to do. Before he acted, he observed. Before he chose a tool, he thought. Before he ran with the crowd, he asked whether the crowd was even running in the right direction. He had what the wise call a prepared mind, and as we have been told for generations, opportunity favors the prepared mind. Opportunity did not skip the strong men at that lake or that tower. It walked right past them because their minds were too busy straining to see it. Look closely at each of his 5 challenges, and you will see the same pattern again and again. The other contestants asked, "How can I do this faster?" He asked, "Is there a different way to do this at all?" The others tried to force the problem. He tried to understand it. Think outside the box, we say, and that is exactly what he did, while everyone else was trying to break through its walls. There is something else hidden in the story that is easy to miss. The boy was not born with this wisdom. He earned it during the very years the village laughed at him. While he lay beneath his roof of leaves, his hands were still, but his eyes and his ears were working harder than any farmer in those fields. He listened to every bird. He watched every movement. He studied every pattern. And though no one paid him a single coin for it, he was building a library inside his own mind. A library that would one day be worth more than gold. Remember this: a lazy mind wastes talent. A determined heart transforms it. The boy's body looked lazy, but his mind was anything but. The truly lazy person is not the one who pauses to think. The truly lazy person is the one who refuses to think at all, who runs blindly, year after year, never asking whether their effort is taking them anywhere. Laziness may rest today, but regret wakes tomorrow, is a heavy truth. But the laziness that brings regret is the laziness of the mind, not just the body. This is also a story about the quiet power of need. The boy did not invent his rafts and rollers and bamboo channels in comfort. He invented them when his father lay sick, when his crops were dying, and when he had no other choice. Necessity is the mother of invention, and necessity was the cruelest and the kindest teacher this boy ever met. Sometimes life has to push us to the very edge of what is possible before we discover what we are truly capable of. Until then, Most of us sleepwalk through our own gifts. And let no one mistake this story for a message against hard work. It is not. The boy worked hard, but he worked hard with his mind first and his hands second. Success follows when hard work meets smart work. One without the other is incomplete. Pure muscle without thought wears itself out. Pure thought without action stays a daydream. The two must meet, and when they do, ordinary lives turn into extraordinary ones. So what does this story ask of you today? It asks you to stop for one honest moment and look at the problems in your own life. Where are you running when you should be watching? Where are you pushing when you should be thinking? Where are you copying what everyone else is doing instead of asking whether there is a simpler way? Don't be part of the problem. Be part of the solution. And that solution rarely comes from doing more of the same thing harder. It comes from stepping back, looking again, and finding the small, elegant path that everyone in a hurry has missed. It is not the strongest that survives, but the one most responsive to change. The world keeps changing around you. The people who flourish in it are not the ones with the loudest voices or the heaviest arms. They are the ones who keep their eyes open and their minds awake. And if the path you finally see looks impossible, walk it anyway. Where there is a will, there is a way, the elders have always said. And they have been right for thousands of years. It always seems impossible until it's done. Every great life, every great invention, every great victory once looked impossible to someone until a quiet, prepared mind stepped forward and quietly did it. The strongest weapon is not muscle, but a thinking mind. Your most powerful asset is not in your arms or in your wallet. It is between your two ears. Sharpen it, train it, feed it. Give it stillness when it needs stillness, and give it work when it needs work. Because the future depends on what you do today. And what you do today depends on how clearly you can think right now. Success comes to those who act, but it comes most generously to those who act wisely. Now, I want to hear from you. What was the most powerful lesson from this story for you? Wisdom, hard work, preparation, or thinking differently? Write your answer in the comments below. And tell me honestly, have you ever solved a problem not by working harder, but by thinking smarter? Your experience might inspire someone else who is facing a difficult challenge right now. Most of us are already wise enough to know these truths deep within, but in the rush of busy days, in the noise of endless tasks, this wisdom quietly gets buried. Through these stories, we try to bring back a little hope, a gentle smile, a quiet happiness, and a moment of joy into your heart. But we cannot do this alone. We need your support in spreading this happiness to the world. So please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story that could change the way you live. I'll be back again with another powerful story. Until then, be patient, stay grateful, and remember, the loudest, strongest, fastest path is not always the right one. Open your eyes, open your mind. The simpler path is almost always waiting nearby for the quiet heart wise enough to see it.